So we've got a workshop coming up and we're about to do a gradation of colour as a background for that workshop. And what we're going to do in the actual workshop, we're going to investigate the idea of creating a painting using a gradation of colour as a background or as a basis, and then detail on top of that. We're going to be looking at warm to cool, and we're going to be looking at the idea of creating mood using very minimal brush strokes in certain areas and stronger paint in others. And it's a beachscape. What's not to like? Hi, I'm Mark Waller, and we're all about finding magic in the world, painting it, and sharing all of that with you guys. We're going to create a light source here, and we're going to radiate out this way into a darker area, more into blues. We're going to stick with cadmium yellow medium and into the blues. It won't go green. We're going to be a little bit strategic with some dioxazine purple to counteract that. And then we'll paint the sand and represent the idea of it being closer to the light source as well. So strap yourselves in. So I've got my white and cadmium yellow medium. They're going to be the area closest to the light source. Then they're going to go in, we'll put a tiny bit of dioxazine purple, and then it will fade into the blues. We're just putting the dioxazine purple in to stop it going green. And that's our brush we're using. Grabbing a big blob of white. And it's going around about here. I'm using Atelier Interactive, and I've made that around about third of the way down. So now I've got some white, I've added a tiny bit of water to that, and I'm just pinching the tiniest bit of cadmium yellow. You should barely be able to see that. That's probably a little bit too tiny a bit. Now I'm going to add a little bit of, tiny bit of dioxazine purple to that. And a tiny bit of French ultramarine blue. And a bit more white. I'm making sort of a V out there in case you can't see that. And now it's almost exclusively French ultramarine blue. But I think I'm going to put just a touch more cad yellow medium in that. Now you can see that paint's a little bit skinny. I've put a little bit too much water in that. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more white. And a touch more cad yellow. Here. And I'm going to blend them together. Now this area up here is sky, so do your best to get a nice even gradation there. And this part here will be wet sand, so you can actually brush your gradations that way a little bit. Doesn't matter if it's got a bit of a line in it. Good idea to clean your brush right now. And dry it. You want it to be nice and dry. I just flick the excess water out of the brush. And now I'm just going to blend that all out so it's all nice and soft and supple. So we're going to work fairly quickly because I want to get this sand in. But before we move on to that, I just want you to know that I've done this pretty quickly. Don't be scared. If it doesn't quite work out, just repeat the process again, paint over it, throw it out in the sun for 10 minutes, let it dry, and then repeat the process. You're better off to get it right the first time. And 3 or 4 coats of paint on the canvas won't hurt it at all. So we're going to paint some sand here now, but I can either work from the dark and back to the light, or work from the light and out into the dark. I think I'll start with the dark colour first. Stolen a little bit of burnt umber, a little bit of dioxazine purple, a little bit of cadmium yellow medium, and a tiny bit of French ultramarine blue, because the sky above that area is French ultramarine. So I've put my sand colour over here. I'm going to let that fade out a little bit there. I've got a trick to play with that. And now as I come into the light source and get some more white and a bit more cadmium yellow, and we want that nice early morning sandy beach kind of colour, I'm going to extend that right out to there, like that. Get in there. And I'm just going to steal some more white, like that. And a bit more yellow like that. It's probably a bit too much yellow. I'm going to add a bit more white. And I'm just going to soften this area here because I want to create the impression of the sunlight hitting that sand. I'm going back to this original colour here, and I've added some white to it. And again, a bit more white. So this is the bones of the picture. We'll put a couple of little bits and pieces over it quickly now while the paint's wet. And we're going to do it that way because I want this to be subtle. But if you make a mess, it's not a drama because you can just repeat that process and paint over it again and do the whole process again. It's just a bit of fun. But this will at least give the idea of where the horizon is and give the whole thing some form. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pinch this sand colour here. And there's my horizon, and I'm going to start, just while that's there like that, just soften that out like that. That's a little too strong, but that's okay. And now I'm going to add a tiny bit of blue to that. And a little bit more blue. It's probably a little bit too much. And the good thing about doing this while it's wet is that you can soften it up like that. If it's a little bit overdone, you can soften it up. So if you look at this picture, you will see I've got this sand colour here, and I put it up here in the clouds. This is kind of the yellow area of the picture. And as we move back out here, we're moving into the blue area of the picture. So these clouds that are out here are a little bit stronger, and the blue's a little stronger. What we can do too, or what I will do, is I will just clean up that brush and just soften all of this up, because I want these clouds to be quite indistinct, like that. We can add to that later. And while we've got these colours, so I've got this colour here again. This is wet sand, and I'm just going to suggest, it's very, very wet and very subtle, but that's okay. Wet sand. I'll get that cloud colour and do that. Like that. Come back to that cloud colour. And we might be starting to see the clouds. There's the horizon and here's the wet sand, and we'll be building our waves and our highlights and the clouds on top of all of that. Even though this is really subtle, hopefully we can get the suggestion of maybe a bank of clouds out here on the horizon, and there's some wet sand here. This is the drier sand, and we'll be painting waves and all that sort of stuff in here, and highlights on the clouds, a few bits and pieces here. And the whole thing will gradually get more and more depth and more strength as we go. But it's building on top of that subtlety is what we're trying to do, because it means we can leave some light areas really moody and lit well, and we can put some details further away from the light source.